Good morning. I'm Jonathan Reckford, CEO of Habitat for Humanity International, and I am so delighted to welcome you all to a really important conversation. I'm thrilled we have Jonathan Greenblatt, CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, and Ibu Patel, founder of Interfaith America. And Jonathan, Ibu, thank you both so much for joining us for this critical conversation. We're excited to have a conversation both about why we are seeing so much polarization and division in our society, but more importantly, what we can do about it. Welcome.
Thank you.
Great to be here. Thank you, Jonathan.
This panel came from a couple of different conversations that have been going on. Jonathan and I were talking about the rise in hate crimes and all the challenges that come with that. And he made a comment, the ADL fights hate, Habitat for Humanity builds hope. And it made me think, how can we do things differently? And Ibu and I have been in a whole series of conversations, and we'll share a little more around how do we specifically use service as an antidote to polarization and to bring people together across all these different divides. What we're seeing is increasingly people defining themselves by what they are against rather than what they are for or what they believe in. And that leads to culture wars. And feeding that divide has become a big business. In some ways, all the incentives are taking us in the wrong direction. Politicians raise more money and get more attention by being more extreme. Cable news and social media sell more ads and teach their algorithms how to raise more money for them by making people scared and angry, which is the highest level of engagement. And all of that is forcing messages further and further to the far left and to the far right. And I think increasingly frustrating a big block of the country. So many of us feel caught in the middle of that. So during this discussion, we'd like to unpack the meaning of service, some of the things that have led us to this point, and how forging meaningful relationships with people across differences can be that antidote and bridge building technique to build the kind of community I think we all want to be a part of. More importantly, we want to make sure we identify action steps and concrete things we can do to help be part of the solution. Ivo, I'd love to start with you. What are you seeing, and from your perspective, why is this such a needed conversation?
Well, I think the ambition of the American experiment is running up against some of the reality of the tribal nature of human. I think that what is so inspiring about being an American is that you can disagree with people on some fundamental things and work together with them on other fundamental things. So when you think about a group of surgeons working together in a hospital to do a heart transplant, or you think about people working in disaster relief, or you think about a Habitat for Humanity build, that example was so inspiring to me in the founding of Interfaith America. What you are seeing is the best of America, which is people from diverse identities and divergent ideologies who disagree on a whole set of fundamental things, working together on other fundamental things. There's no way you can have a diverse democracy without that kind of ethic, without that kind of muscle. And I want to say just from the get-go that both of your organizations were enormously inspiring to me in the founding and building of Interfaith America, which just celebrated our 20th anniversary this past week. Habitat for Humanity is an organization that is animated by a Christian impulse and ethos. And part of the original story was a Habitat build brought together Christians of different denominations who might not agree on the nature of Jesus, but could agree on the theology of the hammer. That is very much the ethic of Interfaith America, is bring people together from different backgrounds who disagree on major things, but will work together to serve others. And the ADL, its founding mission was to ensure to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment for all. And I think that's the best of kind of an identity-based civic organization. You emerge from a particular ethos, in this case, a Jewish ethos. Your principal priority is to make sure that that identity community is safe and secure. And you know that that will not happen unless every identity community in our diverse democracy is safe and secure. So I just want to say a big thank you to your institutions and the two of you in particular for leading efforts that have really shaped Interfaith America.
Thanks so much, Ibu. I think your work is so critical, and I want to dive more deeply into it. Jonathan, you are seeing some pretty alarming things in the country. Talk a little bit about your perspective and the urgency of this conversation from your side now.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here and for convening this conversation, Jonathan, which I think is so timely and so relevant. And for me, it's a pleasure to be in the company, not just of yourself, an institution which I so deeply admire, but Interfaith America. And I really am grateful for Ibu walking through our mission and I think correctly identifying what makes this organization so unique is that mix of the particular and the universal. And the idea when ADL was founded almost 110 years ago, that Jewish people couldn't be safe unless everyone was safe, that until everyone was free, the Jewish minority couldn't be free. Today, in a world of intersectionality, we take that for granted. We see the interrelationship between different, to use Ibu's term, identity communities. But 110 years ago, that was a bold and audacious, wild idea. And how gratifying that today it's sort of table stakes for so many groups fighting for a safer, more secure, more just America. All that being said, the reality is this work matters more than ever because hate is on the rise in America. And I don't mean that just rhetorically, I mean that empirically. At the ADL, we fight all forms of hate, and we track hate incidents, particularly the anti-Semitic variety. And I can tell you that 2021, we tabulated the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents we have ever seen. And again, decades and decades and decades of doing this work. 2,717 acts of harassment, vandalism, and violence against Jewish people in 21 was a 34% increase over the prior year. And by the way, the FBI, which tracks all forms of hate crimes as reported to it by local law enforcement agencies, tracked a 7% rise in 2020, the year for which they have the latest data. That was the highest point in 12 years. And in particular, anti-Semitic hate crimes and anti-AAPI hate crimes are on the rise. And we've seen the surge of anti-Asian hate in so many different venues. In addition to, if you look at our political discourse and the campaign season, which is well upon us now, the anti-immigrant rhetoric, the anti-LGBTQ rhetoric, the anti-Black rhetoric is certainly become almost normalized as part of the public conversation. So I think in this moment, Jonathan, the data tells us that something is going on. I think anecdotally, so many of us also feel it in what we're seeing on the news feeds on our phones, what we're hearing on talk radio or cable news, what we're seeing play out in conversations at school boards and library commissions. This is why this work matters so much right now.
Thank you for that. It is, boy, there's a lot to unpack there, and I want to dig deeper. Before we go right into the issues, I'd actually love to hear a little more about each of your stories and what pulled you into this work. What was the spark that made you want to be a part of doing such critical work to both build bridges and protect our diverse communities? Ibu, what was the spark for you in terms of wanting to spend your life building bridges across faiths?
Sure. So part of it is my own identity community. I'm an Ismaili Muslim, and a huge part of being a Muslim for me is summed up in the line in the Quran that God made us different nations and tribes that we may come to know one another. That diversity is holy, and that the gift that God gives human beings is the ability to flow with diversity and to engage it positively. My faith community is also a community of institution builders. And so we built, for example, the world's first university, Al Azhar, and currently operate some of the best universities in the Muslim majority world, the Aga Khan universities. And so this notion of building institutions that would live out the ethos of pluralism has been central for my own faith community. And I want to be an exponent of that. I feel like I'm being a good Muslim, a good Ismaili Muslim, and following that. And the other side of the coin of that is recognizing how much my life has benefited from institutions that other identity communities have built that serve everyone. And I want to say that this is, I think, really a part of the American genius. And I think Habitat for Humanity and the ADL exemplify this, which is particular identity communities build institutions that serve everyone, not just their own identity community. And so my life has been shaped by being at the YMCA, which of course was built by a Christian ethos, by Habitat for Humanity projects. My dad went to Notre Dame University, a university built by French Catholics, and very much felt at home there as an Ismaili Muslim. My kids went to Catholic preschools. My best friends my whole life have been Jews. I've greatly benefited from reading African American literature, particularly Zora Neale Hurston and James Baldwin. And so I love this idea that we can be inspired by our own identity, be connected to those roots and to that history, and to serve people of all backgrounds. And I really think that that's what America is about. We are a nation. Our genius as a nation is that people from particular identities can build institutions that serve everybody and both be deeply Jewish, deeply Muslim, deeply Christian, deeply African American, deeply gay, et cetera, in a way that serves everybody. That is a remarkable feature of American democracy.
That is so critical. And Ibu, I've learned a lot from you over the years. And one of the things that you say that's been so important is that you don't have to give up who you are in order to, or what you believe in order to work with other people. And I think sometimes in many of our faith communities, but also in our secular world, we have gotten that upside down, that you have to believe the right things before you can belong. And I think that is very damaging. Our primary mission is housing, but we've always had an element of Habitat's work that is about bringing people together across all kinds of differences around the world. And what I'm struck by is that when people come together to do something that appeals to their shared values, they then think about what they have in common, as opposed to our current media world where we are so focused on difference and separation, and increasingly living in echo chambers that only feed us reinforcing, or in some cases, inflammatory information that others and makes us think not only are those people who disagree with me, but those are bad people on the other side. Jonathan, how about for you? What really drove you to a life of service, and what made you want to take on this huge task?
Well, I think so. A few things. I don't have Ibu's remarkable track record of taking his energy and his intellect and his talent and pouring it into one organization, building it as he's done with Interfaith America for 20 years, making it such a vital player in intergroup and interfaith relations in the country today. Like my path is quite different. So I always wanted to change the world, but I've done it in a few different fields. So I've had a chance of working in politics. And I should say, actually, when I got involved in all of this, it's because as a student at Tufts University who was on work study, I was compelled by President Clinton, or Governor Clinton's presidential campaign in '92, where he talked about service as a strategy to pay down your student loans. And he highlighted these young organizations, one called Teach for America and another called City Year. And he touted this idea, and I thought that's a much better way of paying for college than what I was doing, which was working in the dining halls and lots of other odd jobs. So I actually moved down to Little Rock, Arkansas. I went to work for Governor Clinton right after I graduated college. One thing led to another, and I ended up spending a few years in government doing international economics, both at the Commerce Department and the White House. But I did that because I wanted to serve and I wanted to change the world. After that, I spent a few years in business, building brands and helping create companies with, again, a service-oriented mission, including a business called Ethos Water that I co-created with my roommate from business school, the bottled water business that donated upwards of half of its profits to fund humanitarian water programs around the world. I thought business was the way you could change the world. We created Ethos, scaled it to a nice size, and sold it to Starbucks, where I then worked for a while as the VP of Global Consumer Products, and I served on the board of the foundation. So I've spent about about 12 years in business at Starbucks, at a company called Realtor, inside Google, again, trying to change the world through markets. And then after a second tour of duty at the White House, now I found myself in this job at ADL. And again, I think the through line that runs across my career, whether it was in government, public service, the private sector, or now in kind of civil society, is this notion that I could be part of something bigger than myself and I could change the world. And that's one of the messages I would send to folks watching today who are thinking to themselves, well, I want to do something world changing. I want to do something of service. For some people, that might mean joining AmeriCorps. For others, that might mean being a school teacher. For others, that might mean being a product manager and building a brand that's committed to creating a more sustainable or more equitable future, again, through a delivery of a product or service. For others, that might mean um, going into government, getting involved in the political campaign. For some others, it might mean volunteering and being involved in Habitat, or hosting an interfaith, launching an Interfaith America group, or getting involved in ADL. I just think, Jonathan, there are infinite ways that one can pour your gifts into something greater than yourself. And people shouldn't feel circumscribed to do it on only one career path or through only one venue. I think there's lots of possibilities for the person who's willing to experiment and take some risks.
Absolutely. It's a different conversation, would be another good one. But one of the disconnects I also see that you are bridging personally is that sometimes I see private sector, public sector, and civil society speaking different languages. And I believe we actually need more bridge builders there. So multi-sector leaders like yourself who are bilingual or trilingual across the sectors are incredibly valuable because often the language can separate people as well. And my hypothesis, at least, is that these really complex issues require multi-sector solutions, that neither the public sector, private sector, nor civil society can solve these really big, complex societal challenges without coming together. And certainly, we certainly believe that with housing. Let's dig a little deeper. Jonathan, you mentioned it. Talk a little bit about what you wrote in your book and how what you see as the best solutions. So first, as clearly the statistics you shared are alarming. For people of goodwill from all these different perspectives, what are your best cases of how to move in the right direction and lower those alarming statistics?
Well, I mean, I think there are a few things. First of all, I want to underscore a point you just made. There is no silver bullet to stopping hate. There is no magic wand we can wave that will fix all the complex issues in society. And maybe in a different time and place, one could have said, oh, there's a way to solve this. But as you said, we need multi-sector strategies. We need what is kind of, I think, sometimes called almost cliche, public-private partnerships. We need ways to leverage the power of markets, the force of government, the kind of the impetus of nonprofits. I mean, again, there's no one way to do it. Now, as it relates specifically to stopping the spread of stereotypes and fighting hate, there's a simple way that we think about it, Jonathan, here at ADL. So number one, we think you've got to speak up and sort of say something when you see something. And speaking up really is not just about ringing the bell when you point a finger and see someone go after someone else. There's a lot of that in our divided society. But it starts by being accountable to ourselves. Because I think there are no home teams, if you will, or away teams in the fight against hate. We're all on the same team, right? It's not really right or left, Jonathan. It's right and wrong. So what that means is if you self-identify as a progressive, say something when you see a progressive person do something you think is wrong. If you identify as a Jewish person, you can speak out and self-criticize when someone else of your faith does something that's wrong. I think speaking up matters a lot when you have the courage to call it out when it happens on your own side. You've got to calibrate correctly. Don't get me wrong. But I think that's important, number one. So speaking up. Number two, sharing facts. What I mean by that is we've all got to dial down the drama, Jonathan. Like there's too much hysteria, there's too much hyperbole, there's too much polarization. I think everybody needs to bring it in and resist the temptation to forward that crazy email from, your neighbor's mother-in-law, if you will, right? Resist the temptation to furiously add to the WhatsApp string when you hear something you don't like. But I think it's really important to dial it down, bring down the volume. And remember, like, at least for us at ADL, we don't believe in cancel culture. Jonathan, we believe in counsel culture. And I think it's a Christian ethos. I think it's a Jewish ethos. I'm sure it's a Muslim ethos to embrace the sinner. So when someone makes a mistake, the answer isn't to cancel them, but to counsel them, to give them the opportunity to understand why what they said is hurtful, and to recognize that everyone has the power, has the capacity to be redeemed. So that's very important, number two. So speak up, share facts, and ultimately show strength. I think we've all got to lean in if we want to stop the spread of hate, whether that's in the boardroom, at the water cooler at work, on your Facebook, wall, in your Twitter thread. You can flag a message that's hateful or offensive. You can say something to a colleague who expresses, like a crude joke targeting a population. Again, as we were talking about earlier, you can volunteer with a group that you think is doing good work, like Habitat or Interfaith America. You could write a check and make a donation. You could actually even get more involved. So, but I think, there was a commercial like for the lottery many years ago, Jonathan Ebu. The phrase was, you got to be in it to win it. So I think you got to lean in, not lean back, in order to interrupt intolerance effectively. Because democracy, this thing that we have here, it's like a Fabergé egg that we've got to hold carefully and treat with such delicacy. Because democracy is not sort of a spectator sport that will just keep going. We've got to get on the field. We've got to try to make it happen. We've got to treat it with tremendous care if we want to sustain it for the next generation.
Thank you, Jonathan. So many parts there. I love the first part you said, which is the courage it takes to challenge your own team. I think we have become so tribal in some ways that it's easy to attack those people, but takes great courage, and it's quite scary to come out and call out the transgressions. So we're in a world, often politically, it feels like there's an unwillingness to acknowledge any good from the other side, and maybe more painfully, an unwillingness to call any fouls or object to any behavior, no matter how egregious, from your own side. And I think that's huge as a starting point. It is, but not an easy thing, and that's going to take people believing. And the last point, we were talking actually before the session started, that we're in an anti-institutional time here in this country and globally, and I think sometimes the assumption is you can throw bombs at the institutions and that still have all the benefits of those institutions that were built up over decades and decades. And I don't think that's a safe assumption necessarily. Ibu, you have been in the midst of some of the hardest conversations, and one of the things I've so appreciated with you is you've got a clear-eyed, in some ways, strong view of interfaith. And I've been part of well-intended interfaith groups that believed in order to work together, you had to reach theological agreement. And I've actually never seen that work. And on the flip side, what I've seen very powerfully over and over is when people come together in some common to do something out of their shared values, that can be very powerful. And then you build relationship and trust without having to agree. I've learned a lot of that from you. Talk a little bit about what you have seen as you've been in the midst of some of these sometimes very difficult conversations.
Well, I mean, we are in a mutual admiration society here because a lot of my view on this was formed in Habitat for Humanity projects. And in fact, not only did I participate in Habitat work in high school and in college, but one of the early Interfaith America projects at the time when the organization was known as Interfaith Youth Corps was a Habitat for Humanity build in Hyderabad, India, where we brought together people from different nationalities and faith groups to build a house together and then to share what it is from their diverse faith and national backgrounds, what inspired them to serve. And that became kind of the original methodology of Interfaith Youth Corps, now Interfaith America. I write about this, and so one of the reasons I want to underscore that is that it was an institution, Habitat for Humanity International, that organized a set of programs that became patterns of activity that around the world were individual projects like that Habitat for Humanity built in Hyderabad. And that's what institutions are. They're units that have patterns of activity that help shape our society. So if it's a YMCA, it's recreational activities and athletic activities and after school programs. If it's an educational institution, it's academic programs. But we don't have a society without this set of institutions. Should institutions be better? Absolutely. One of the things I write about in my book, We Need to Build, is defeat the things you do not love by building the things you do. Build a better institution. I wasn't crazy about the way that interfaith work was happening in the late 1990s. I thought it was too focused on senior theologians and dialogue. And in the midst of criticizing one of those efforts, a woman approached me. Her name was Yolande Trevino, and she said, I love the idea that you have that interfaith work should be about young people doing service projects together with a sense of vanguard energy and a real movement ethos. You should build that. Build a better institution, right? If you don't like how healthcare is going, build a better way of doing health. You can start at the community level and then raise it up, and that's actually where the Mayo Clinic comes from. And so this notion that social change is not about a more ferocious revolution. Social change is about a better social order or a more beautiful social order. And the definition of a social order is the institutions that we have: the health, the recreation, the educational, the youth serving, the government, the institutions that we have. Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist, would talk about the genius of American institutions. Part of the genius is that we continue to improve them. We build new ones and we expand upon and polish existing ones. I think that that's really important. I'm really proud of the people who have come out of Interfaith America, who have gone on to lead or build other institutions. I always say to my colleagues on staff, if you're here for a couple years and you pay attention, you'll learn how to lead an institution. Right? That's what a good society is. It's a network of those kinds of institutions. And I'm honored to be here with, the Jonathans who are not only leading the two of, I think, the most critical institutions in American society, the ADL and Habitat for Humanity, but are two of the best leaders that I know of in American society. So I will continue with the heartfelt mutual admiration society, and just appreciate the work of your individual leadership and the collective impact of your institutions.
Thank you, Ibu, and right back at you. It is, you and I have been part of something that is emerging, and they were separate activities, but Ibu and I were part of a bridging conference, which was interesting, where we were hearing from some academics on what really works in terms of, and then more recently, the White House convened a gathering. Actually, all three of us were there just a few weeks ago, focused on how do we combat hate. And one of the examples was very specifically service. Ibu, do you want to mention just briefly what we're trying to do with United as part of the United We Stand effort?
Sure. So I want to say that probably the main reason the White House held that summit was because of Jonathan Greenblatt's work in encouraging the Domestic Policy Council to host a summit that would highlight just how pernicious hate and polarization was in the nation, and also focus on solutions. And it's really hard to do that. It's hard to say there's a big problem here and there's also solutions to that problem. So a huge thank you to Jonathan Greenblatt for his leadership in many ways behind the scenes, and just massively important in that summit. And so, Jonathan Reckford, you and I had the joy of putting together a major initiative that was announced by President Biden called a Nation of Bridge Builders, and we'll be working together with the YMCA. And when Sister Donna of Catholic Charities heard the news, she called you, Jonathan, and said, I want to be a part of this also. And the big idea of a Nation of Bridge Builders is that the most American thing you can do is come together with somebody with whom you disagree to work together to serve others. Diversity is not just the differences you like. I'll say it again. Diversity is not just the differences you like. And in a highly diverse democracy, we need to build the muscle of working with people with whom we disagree to serve others. We do it in disaster relief. We do it in social services. We do it in healthcare. We do it in recreation. We do it in our little leagues and in our PTAs, and we need to make that a patriotic duty. I work with people of diverse identities and divergent ideologies to serve others. And the Nation of Bridge Builders initiative, which was announced by President Biden at the White House, and which we're talking to a number of partners to advance, will train thousands and thousands of people, of bridge builders, to be able to bring diversity together around a common service project, like a Habitat for Humanity build, like a YMCA program, like a Catholic Charities effort. I think of it as a potluck. A potluck relies on the contributions of diverse people. If people don't contribute, you don't have a potluck. If everybody brings the same dish, the potluck is boring. And the goal of the host of a potluck is to create a space where people can make their diverse contributions, where there can be enriching conversations and creative combinations, and where one person's best dish is improved by somebody else's best dish. And so I see us hosting in the Nation of Bridge Builders initiative the giant, most delicious American potluck imaginable, and making engagement across disagreement a patriotic duty once again.
I love that. And I love the imagery of a potluck versus a melting pot. We don't all have to be the same, but everyone can bring what they bring their gifts and to make the whole meal richer and the whole community stronger. Thank you for that image. And Jonathan, I'm curious about your reactions. One of the things that really struck me in a personal way from that summit was the stories of individuals who were the victims of hate crimes and responded not with more hate, but counterculturally with first forgiveness, and then actually quite extraordinarily devoting their time to making things better. Can you share a little bit of your reactions to that?
Yeah, I think, hate is something that can sometimes feel a bit abstract, almost intangible if you haven't experienced it. And yet, it's like that all of us know someone who maybe um, because of where they're from or how they pray or who they love, has been on the receiving end. And it could be subtle, like biased attitudes. It could be something more outright, like discrimination, or it could be an actual, kind of a biased incident, like an act of harassment or vandalism, or even violence. And so, what was so powerful about that day at the White House, and by the way, while I appreciate Ibu's credit, there were a lot of people who were involved in helping to make that happen. I may have been one small voice. There were many voices. It was a chorus, which is really meaningful. And, Ibu was one of the people on stage, again, really contributing to the rich dialogue and conversation that made the day so special. But that being said, hearing from individuals who experienced it, really, I think, drove the point home. And what's so extraordinary, Jonathan, and again, I think while hate can sometimes, hate hurts and it can make one sad, almost kind of cynical in a way, seeing how people bounce back, seeing how people are often embraced by their communities gives you a sense of renewal. And to use the term where we started this conversation, hope, really how you build hope. And so to see the man whose father was killed, this Punjabi Sikh man whose father was killed at the Gurdwara in Oak Creek in 2013, which was, by the way, the most violent anti-Sikh attack in American history. The summit, United We Stand at the White House, was held 10 years to the day of that attack on the anniversary. And get how he has devoted himself to bringing communities together in the wake of that terrible tragedy. Or to learn, as I've seen at ADL over the years, how synagogues and their membership have come together with local mosques and Islamic centers that have been attacked or vandalized or sometimes even burned down. Or I think about that story in Toronto where the members of a mosque came to protect a synagogue and to clean it up after it had been vandalized a few years ago. So I think it's, to Ibu's earlier point, like maybe it is a uniquely American thing because this melting pot metaphor, which has now evolved into the potluck that Ibu has, sort of identified, is such a unique cultural dynamic, I think, here in these United States. I mean, as someone who believes in American exceptionalism, I think this is one of the things that does make America so exceptional. And these moments where at the White House and beyond, where you see people who've experienced hate and how they've come together, how they have it renews your faith in this democracy and what's possible when people again discover that we have more in common than the things which keep us apart.
I think it's so important that we tell those positive stories, and unfortunately, they don't draw the same ratings, but it's so important. And one of the things I've just observed year after year after year is you can't berate or force people into change. You have to love them into change, and it's really those, it's when a congregation in Charleston forgives the person who shot their partners. It's when you see communities respond unnaturally to hate that we start to see hearts really getting transformed, and it's so powerful. I remember talking to Vilma, who was one of the speakers that day, and she's a woman from the Philippines who was horrifically beaten in New York City, and I think
Yes.
those images went viral. And talking to her afterwards, it really shook her faith. She's a person of deep faith, and ultimately, uh, she became stronger through that, healed, and has been speaking out and building bridges. And in the tiny world where lives in, turns out her brother used to work for Habitat in the Philippines.
Oh,
But
wow.
I was thinking how unusual um, it would be so easy to become bitter, turn inward, and then hate those who had treated you so poorly. And I'm struck, Ibu, I loved your story. It reminded me of a story, my first international build with President Carter, who is one of my heroes and who has always been a peace builder. And we were building in a different part of India outside Mumbai, where his mother had served in the Peace Corps at the age of 70. But one of the side pieces, along with people from all over the world coming together to build, there were a couple things that were distinctive. One was that all the houses were going to be titled in the women's names, which was setting a different standard. But the others, we had a group of Pakistani and Indian college students spend the week building together. And I had the privilege of spending an hour at the end of the week sitting down and just hearing what they'd learned. And I was so struck because these are students who had grown up being taught how different they were and how bad the other were. And all they could talk about is how much they had in common. They looked alike, they dressed alike, they spoke similar languages, and it was so illuminating and so encouraging. And I think then the question is, how do we create that space for more people to have personal relationships with people who are different? I think in many ways that's at the heart of it. But if you could if you could control the world, um, as we move to the solution side, what would you do differently, or what things would you create to maximize that chance for meaningful social interaction and real relationship across difference?
Sure. So if the metaphor that I like to use is the potluck, right? And really, what the potluck is, it's a metaphor for diversity. And the melting pot, it was a step forward in its time in 1909, right? But we're not on the brink of World War One anymore, and we're 100 plus years later. So the melting pot is a bygone metaphor. We're currently in a diversity paradigm that I think of as the battleground, where we're constantly pointing to our differences and disagreements with other people, and drawing these lines, and talking about who we can't work with or can't talk to. You cannot have a diverse democracy that is organized as a battleground. Human beings do not need any help being hostile to one another. You have to have a different kind of diversity paradigm, and that's where the potluck comes in, right? So if that's the metaphor, the kind of bumper sticker version of this is respect, relate, cooperate. And I think that that's what both Habitat for Humanity and the ADL do very well. It's what we try to do at Interfaith America. You create activities where people can develop respect for each other's identities, where they can relate positively across difference and disagreement, and where they can cooperate with others to serve people, right? Respect, relate, cooperate. And I think that that happens through civic activities. It happens in little leagues. It happens in parent teacher associations. It happens in Habitat for Humanity bills. It happens at YMCA summer camps. And if I had a magic wand, what I would do is I would strengthen and spread the civic infrastructure of America. Like, I know it sounds a little bit geeky, right? Which is why, I like to use the metaphor of the delicious potluck and the bumper sticker version of respect, relate, cooperate. But at the heart of this is our civic infrastructure. If you want to work with somebody who is different from you and with whom you disagree, you need to have an activity to do that in. You need to have a structure to do that in. That's what Habitat for Humanity, that's what Little League, that's what the YMCA do really well. That's what our college campuses do well, which is why Interfaith America does so much work on college campuses. And so I write about this a lot in my book, We Need to Build, about the civic genius of American society, and how we have built a civic infrastructure that brings people from diverse identities and divergent ideologies together to work on something in common and to structure relationships that are cooperative. So, what I think we need to return to is this notion that you can vote for somebody different and you can work with people to serve others. You can vote for people, you can vote for different candidates, and you can work with people to serve others. Now, I want to say there are parameters to this, right? Like, I'm not buying a brownie from the KKK bake sale. There are people that I'm not really interested in talking to or working with, but that's a small, very small group. And I'm not looking for reasons to not engage with you, right? I'm looking for reasons to work with you. I'm looking for reasons to come together with you. Bridges don't fall from the sky or rise from the ground. People build them. And what we need right now is to be a nation of bridge builders.
So beautifully said. Thank you. And it's been my experience, but the data would bear out as well that if you want to have a hard conversation with someone, very tough to start out with a hard conversation before you've built relationship. And I was talking to Bill Urey, who's done so much international conflict work. And he had that thesis, if you want to talk about something hard, go for a walk together. Don't sit across the table, because then you're looking the same way. You are seeing the world together, and you are kind of shoulder to shoulder, and that's a better basis for it. And then he said, even better, go build a Habitat house, go serve together. And in our beloved community and other bridging work, what we're finding is much better to first do the activity and build relationship, then you can have a different kind of conversation. But that service element is a key piece. We are going to lose Jonathan a little bit early, and I want to recognize that in just a couple minutes. So, Jonathan, I want to turn to you and then to Ibu. What gives you hope? So, what keeps you fighting the good fight in this? And any parting words before we lose you from the conversation?
A few things. I mean, number one, as difficult as it seems, I think it is always darkest before the dawn. And while the recent years have seen this epic kind of surge of extremism and the normalization of hate, the division of our society, and the polarization of seemingly like every quarter of our country, on the other hand, we've also seen an extraordinary degree of civic engagement. The nonprofit sector is bigger than it's ever been. We had more people show up to vote in the last presidential election than at any other time in American history. The Women's March that happened the day after the election, for all of its flaws, and we can talk about that, was the largest demonstration, civic demonstration, again, in US history. We have more people of color and others who represent marginalized communities running for office today. By the way, both on the Democratic and Republican side, the kind of diversity you're seeing among the candidates, I think, is exciting. Whether I agree with all of them on every issue doesn't matter. Seeing more and more people engaged in the process is extraordinary. And I think the entrepreneurial spirit of this country is something which is the envy of the world entire. You can go back to people throughout U.S. history who've observed, the kind of rich ferment of civic innovation, of entrepreneurial spirit that's made our civil society, again, I would say, the envy of the world, that's continually enriched and renewed our democracy. And again, look at Ibu's success in the last 2 decades. That gives me extraordinary hope. Because as he said, bridges don't materialize out of thin air. People build them. And in this country, a lot of people have built a lot of bridges. So I feel, I'm not going to lie, I mean, a number of the indicators are very worrisome. And yet when I talk to young people who are more open-minded, who are more worldly, who are more digitally literate, than prior generations, and who believe that doing their part in society is crucial to them, that the role of the company is not just to maximize profit, but to ensure a better future for everyone. I mean, that is inspiring to me. So there's much work to be done, but I think America's, if you will, our greatest renewable resource is our people, and our people give me extraordinary energy every single day.
That's
Forgive me,
great,
Jonathan,
John.
that I have to go, but thank you so much for convening this important conversation.
Good to
No,
be with you,
thank you
Fred.
for making time, Jonathan. Great to be with you. Thank you for your leadership, and we will
Thank you both.
continue and miss you, but thanks so much. Great to be with you.
Deal.
Ibu, back to you. And for those of you who listening in, please, we want to transition into questions from all of you and invite you into the conversation. So if you enter your questions into the chat, we will feed and try to address some of those as well. But Ibu, same question back to you. What gives you hope? What makes you optimistic that we can do better?
So I love Jonathan's image of it's always darkness before the dawn, and the great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would use that image also, right? And he would say, in the darkness you can see the stars, and then the dawn comes. And one of the stories I like to tell from American history, I actually tell it in my book, We Need to Build, is how the term Judeo-Christian came to be. And let me say that, right now in some quarters, people kind of roll their eyes at Judeo-Christian because American demographics have changed a lot, and that's true. I'll get to that in a moment. But it was a step forward for its time, and the only thing you can do is take a step forward in your time. And the way that the term came to be is the 1920s was a time of really ugly racism, anti-Semitism, anti-Catholic prejudice, xenophobia in America. The Ku Klux Klan numbered some 4 million people. They ran candidates for office. They marched down major streets in D.C. Hate was like a central, overt American value at the time. We can talk about the ugly lynchings that took place, and this is a terrible decade when it comes to the exclusion and the hatred of minorities. In the late 1920s, a group of clergy, rabbis, ministers, Catholic priests, and some lay people come together, and they basically say, we can't forfeit our nation to the forces of hatred. We can't have the KKK define the way we relate across racial and religious boundaries. And they formed an organization called the National Conference for Christians and Jews. And they ran civic activities all over the country. So, something like Habitat for Humanity builds, although they focus on dialogue, tri-faith dialogues with ministers and rabbis and priests. And so as they were building this institution that ran this array of activities, they also virtually invent a new paradigm or metaphor for American democracy, which had long been thought of as a Protestant nation. FDR would say America is a Protestant nation. The Jews and Catholics are here under sufferance, right? Well, the leaders of the NCCJ, the Reverend Everett Clinchy and others said, actually, we are going to call America a Judeo-Christian nation. And one of the remarkable things about this fact is that Judeo-Christian is not either especially theologically or historically accurate. What it is a brilliant civic invention. It's a brilliant new metaphor for American democracy. And so I think to myself, in the face of the ugly KKK 1920s, a group of civic leaders created a different set of activities and a different American story. And we still live in that chapter. Now, what we say at Interfaith America is that the polarization and ugliness of our era needs to lead us to write the next great chapter in the story of American religion and the story of American diversity and the story of American civil society. And we think that chapter should be called Interfaith America. We like the term so much that we renamed the organization after it. We think that both American demographics, the range of world religions that are now in this country, largely as a result of the 1965 Immigration Act, and also the new interactionism between people of different faiths, from atheist to Zoroastrian, means that we should recognize that the Judeo-Christian chapter in American history did good work, but it's time to take the next step, and that step is called Interfaith America. And it's the kind of dynamism of American society that's constantly writing new chapters, building new institutions, improving upon old ones, that gives me a lot of hope. And I think we're at one of those hinge moments right now.
Oh, Yibu, thank you. It is, I think it's so powerful, and I love that imagery. And as I think about it, I almost always heard it as Judeo-Christian values, and I think about interfaith values. And my observation has been that often I am more aligned from values perspective with observant friends of other faiths than I am with secular members of my own faith. And when we focus on those shared values, I think then it's a reminder of how much we have in common in contrast to the pounding we get of that emphasizing the difference. It is
Jonathan, let me say, one of the things we're really proud of doing at Interfaith America, I've experienced this in Habitat Builds is to really welcome a range of identities around religion, from Zoroastrianism to agnosticism and secular philosophies, and we think that there's an undergirding of shared values there, the value of hospitality, the value of compassion, the value of service, and we want to create spaces where people can share what it is from their faith or philosophical worldview that inspires them to serve others. And it's Habitat for Humanity builds that we are often doing with these people, largely on college campuses, expanding out now with organizations like yours and the YMCA and Catholic Charities. But it is the doing of service together, the building of relationships around service that allows us to have conversations that invite people to share their identities and to build that kind of respect, relate, cooperate ethos. So I I love finding things in common with people with whom I deeply disagree, whether it's on matters of politics or doctrine.
now, and when you see real transformation happen, it usually starts with those small personal connections that realize, wait a minute, this person doesn't fit my stereotype of other, and you start building a basis. So it is one of our audience questions is, what are practical steps? And I think you've already down this path that need to be taken to strengthen and spread civic infrastructure. And you and I both deeply believe that service is a key piece of that. I think Robert Putnam laid out that there were certainly many problems in our society in the U.S. 50 and 75 years ago, but there were more intermediating institutions. More people belonged to service groups in their community, belonged to faith groups, had more points of connection that brought them in, and in many ways our schools were more economically diverse, though they certainly were not necessarily racially diverse at that time. And we have become more economically segregated, which has also correlated with more racial segregation as well. So if you were going to be an institution builder, which you are, what are some practical things people watching can go out and do if they want to help build institutions? What would that look like?
Yeah, let's really make the Nation of Bridge Builders initiative successful together. And Jonathan, I'm confident about the coordination amongst the presidents of these organizations, Suzanne and Sister Donna, and you and myself and Simon Greer at Bridging the Gap. I'm confident with that, and I'm confident with our networks that our networks will be really inspired to to uh, to elevate from Habitat for Humanity builds to include maybe synagogues and temples and mosques that might not have been as included before in Habitat for Humanity builds, and to really lean into a training that trains people how to have dialogue between those different groups, and to use the opportunity for a Habitat for Humanity build or a YMCA summer camp, not just to do an activity together, which is really powerful, but also to have a conversation about our diverse identities, to kind of have that dialogue version of the American potluck. So I would say, let's really make this Nation of Bridge Builders initiative successful. Let's make it successful on the ground level. Let's do thousands and thousands of projects across the country, and let's make it successful in the American narrative, in the American imagination. Let's renew this idea for the 21st century that what we do as a nation is we come together across lines of difference to serve others. That's what it means to be to for America to be at its best. And I keep on saying America. And if I was Kenyan, I would talk about Kenya. If I was South African, I'd talk about South Africa this way. I say America in this way, in the same way that I say my parents are the best parents. on the planet, and you say your parents are the best parents on the planet. So there's kind of an exceptionalism that we can all claim wherever we're from, and I really believe that because Interfaith America starts internationally. I was a student in England at the time. I ran the first Interfaith America projects in South Africa, in Sri Lanka, in India, across the European continent, and I learned from those places. I learned from those places. I sat at the feet of Mandela and at the feet of Dr. A.T. Aryaratne in Sri Lanka and many, many others, and absorbed the way that their societies built bridges across difference. And so I'm bringing that back to the nation of my citizenship and strengthening this country. And I hope someday somebody starts an interfaith Kenya, an interfaith Nigeria, in interfaith Nepal. This is my nation, and this is the nation that I serve that way. That's why I talk about America this way.
Oh, fantastic. It is, and I certainly agree with you. I think these core principles are true globally. And actually, some of the challenges in polarization is also getting worse globally. But I have personally seen it. Habitat helped build the first interracial community in South Africa after apartheid. In Northern Ireland, we only build with Protestants and Catholics. I built with Muslims and Christians, Coptic Christians in Egypt, and Hindus and Muslims in India. And I have seen the power of service being that catalyst or bridge for real relationship and a different level of understanding. And as I joke, but it's not really funny, I've even seen Democrats and Republicans build together. So anything is possible. But it is, as we come to a close now, and this time has gone fast, practical advice for the audience. What should they go and do this week, next week, and the week after to be part of the solution?
Learn something that reflect on something you admire about people you disagree with. Reflect on something you admire about people you disagree with. Uh, um, uh, Reflect on a time when you have been helped by somebody whose identity is different than yours in a way that is hard for you. Maybe that's in a medical environment. Maybe that's in a service environment. Maybe that's in disaster relief. I haven't talked about the role of diverse faith-based agencies in disaster relief. Southern Baptists train as many or more disaster relief volunteers as the Red Cross, and 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 whenever there's an earthquake or a tornado or a hurricane, there's people who deeply disagree on doctrine who are partnering with one another to save people from really tough situations with whom they also deeply disagree on doctrine. And I just think that's the most inspiring thing in the world. And I think reflecting on that, taking a moment to tell ourselves the story when our lives have been enriched or even saved by people with whom we deeply disagree, I think is powerful. And then saying, how do I take that ethic out? How can I be, now that I have built the internal bridge in my own soul and remember that moment or that memory, how can I build a bridge in the world?
Ibu, thank you so much. It is, I agree completely. What I've observed is, in fact, it was President Carter wrote it in the foreword to my book, which became the title of Our Better Angels. He said, when a disaster strikes you, you don't care that the person rescuing you is from a different race or a different faith. You are so glad they're there. Why do we have to wait for the disaster for that to happen? Why can't we, quoting President Lincoln, turn to our better angels? And his line was, as the waters rise, so do our better angels. But I think the waters are pretty high right now in our world, right? And we need the better angels. So there are no magic bullets, but it is really people of goodwill choosing to be countercultural. And my advice would be turn off the screens, much as build a real relationship with someone who's different. That can be so powerful. And more get off the screens and get out in the community and serve in some way with others. And I think that can be the most healing thing for our world. You've got the privilege of hearing from Jonathan Greenblatt and Ibu Patel, two friends and leaders I admire greatly. Thank you all for joining us for this conversation. We hope this conversation will lead to lots of action. And we are certainly committed with each of our organizations to being part of the solution. And we hope you will be as well. Thank you. And that's the end of our conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks, everyone.